What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to episode 4 of the Relatabel Podcast. I know, look at me on screen. I look like a freaking Barbie doll. I think it's the Zoom setting that I've put, which is touch up my appearance with this lovely flamingo pink shirt. I have done more than a touch up. I've done probably what some of you would consider a sex change, but I'm probably veering off topic. This has nothing to do with anything I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is money. That's right. Very early on in the series of the Relatabel Podcast, we're going straight for the gonads with this one, in my opinion. Very sensitive topic for a lot of people. No one really talks about it, especially within our cultural context. No one really talks about personal finance. Now, there is a reason I want to talk about it, though. 3 reasons specifically. Number 1, I was a moron when it came to my own finances. Number 2, nobody ever taught me how to manage my finances or my money. I'm going to use those words interchangeably. And so when I did learn how to do it, I was like, my gosh, why the heck did I not learn to do this sooner? Because I felt so much more relieved and not just learn about it, but even act on it. So once I acted on it, I felt so much more relieved. I felt so much more empowered. And to be honest, when you actually first learn about the miracle of compound interest, you realize, God, I need some time on my side. And so the earlier you start, the better. And reason number 3, Sid, would you care to?
I think it's because you're a moron, Abel.
Exactly. You're getting the point and getting the point well, especially when we do this on the the second take, because my internet conked out the first time. That's right. I'm not on my own today to talk about this topic. Obviously, we need an expert. And so I do have an expert who also happens to be a friend, who also happens to be a big hedge fund manager and a wealth expert. And so I'm going to introduce him in just a bit. Okay, maybe I'm overplaying the hedge fund part. I'm hedging him in by even just saying things like that. There are other reasons also why I want to talk about this. Most people, one of those reasons are most people don't have a plan when it comes to their money. Whether they're young or old, it doesn't depend on age. I have seen folks in their 60s and 70s just wonder where money is going to come from. And when you talk to them, you realize they never really had a plan for it back in the day as they navigated life. And the tax season is another time we really get to see how poorly prepared people are. The second reason is, in this day and age, there are way too many options to make your millions. I'm not talking about those Nigerian prince scams that used to show up when we were growing up, but I'm talking about things that are legitimate nowadays, like cryptocurrency, NFTs, which obviously is rooted in blockchain again. I mean, there's just so many ways and means to make money, and there is so much promise of millions. And let me be honest, if you have no foundation with regards to money basics, you have no business going near these things. And lots of people are messing with these things. So not that I'm against it, but I think what we would really want to address is just the framework with which people approach their money management, their personal finance management. And another reason is, for the longest time, I was in a lot of these buckets. I wanted to make lots of money doing whatever was the fad of the season, whether it was making money through YouTube videos or, whatever was going to guarantee me like loads and loads of moolah. That's what I want. And so if you find yourself relating to any one of these buckets, or if you find yourself relating to me in some way, then this is an episode for you. And obviously with Sid's help here, whom I will introduce, what we're going to hopefully establish at the end of this conversation, which might also have to split into 3-4 parts, because, he and I tend to go down different rabbit holes. And, but the hope is that at the end of how many of episodes this is, that you have a construct and you have a framework by which you can begin to develop your own, you can develop your own philosophy around how money should be managed for yourself, your own relationship with it, and maybe you will also have a plan going forward. But first, I must introduce Siddharth Menon. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said earlier, this young man is probably, so we go to the same church, and so he is everybody's go-to guy when it comes to money management. I think it's probably because he's the only guy in church who does financial wealth management. But with Sid, you can actually come on camera now. I want to see your face as I say these things.
I'm really hoping for a second guy to come along so that I can split the duties.
Well, so it's not because he's the only guy, but let me be honest. In my personal interactions with Sid, I have found that here's someone who's my age, who gets what I want from life and has the benefit of being a professional certified financial planner. He also does work in the wealth management industry. His clients, financial advisory and wealth management industry, if I'm being technical about it. He's worked there for the past 6 years. And so, that's as much as you need to know about trusting him. As you can tell, because I said so, he's an expert. Trust the man in Flamingo Pink. So, Sid, welcome to the Relatable Podcast, my friend.
Thanks, Abel. Thanks for having me. And I think it's a great time to talk about money. It's not too early on maybe in your series, but I mean, considering how things have been in the last year or so, this is the perfect time to talk about
we're only in May, so we're at the start of the next fiscal year. And I understand that's not a word people use either, fiscal. They use the word financial.
Financial year, yeah.
But the professionals say fiscal, right?
No, right. Not really. The government says fiscal. All of us.
I don't know if I want to be associated with the government in this day and age. But anyway, let's start at the very beginning. I think that's where we should begin. Just quick summaries of how we both viewed money growing up. I'll let you go first.
Oh, that's always a tough question to answer. The one thing that I always think about is, so my dad was in the army for 22 years before he retired. And the one thing that he always told me, even before I started working, when I was in school or college, asking
for money, pillage and loot.
No, he always started with the fact that he started with 750 rupees per month as his salary in 1979.
So wait. So since let's talk in dollars as well, because I feel like there are a few people from the US listeners.
Well, in today's terms, that would be $10.
He started with $10.
Not an hour, not a week, in a month. Of course, I mean, just for inflation, it comes out to be a higher amount. Yeah. But I mean, it was a constant reminder, probably just for him to ground us in the way that we view money. Because I mean, to be fair, we weren't very well off. I mean, my dad retired in 2001, which is quite early for people to retire from the army. He took a premature retirement, and so. I mean, the opportunities out there for a guy who's been in the army for 22 years aren't. I don't know. I wouldn't say there's a lot of them. Yeah. But I mean, he managed to find work, and he's always been kind of a person who's like good at everything. So he managed to get a job, and he had managed a stock portfolio himself. I don't know how he did it and how he got into it, but just growing up, I mean, my view about money, I would say, was I always looked around people, like my friends or people who weren't that close to me, but I always had people who were well off around me. Yeah. So it was this circle where you don't really think about these things when you make friends with people, but then you end up finding out about it, and I'm like, oh wow, and then you see them have things or talk about.
You didn't grow up with 750 rupees a month too? You had more?
Yeah, we had more by the time I got to school, luckily. Otherwise, no one would be funding my education. But it's funny because I mean, as kids, you really don't know how to think about it. But all you can focus on is the fact that people around you who, essentially should be the same humans as you, have something more than you or something more valuable, whether it's like a gaming console or whether it's like parents having bigger cars, or like we had a Maruti 800. I mean, we started with an Ambassador and then we went to Maruti 800, and before that there was a Chetak scooter. So where all four of us used to sit on it at one point. So you see where I'm coming from. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, but I think growing up, I would just. Unintentionally or inadvertently, I would just think about what others had and I didn't. And it's probably not my parents' fault because, I've seen, looking back right now, I can see how much they actually did to provide for us. And, despite all of that, me and my sister both were able to go to Ireland for our master. So, which is no small thing. And, and that set up basically for a lot of things in our future. And we're doing so much better off because of that.
I can tell from the AirPods. Yeah. Yes, we used to be poor, but now.
But that's the thing, right? At this point when I'm making good money and at least on a relative term, I'm making good money. I don't have to think about it, but it does make me a lot more grateful, and I can obviously afford things that I used to look at other people around me and say, hey, you know what, I can buy this now myself. So it's great to be here, but I think it's important to remember where you were, because it sort of sets the, and like you talked about, it is your money philosophy, it is your relationship with money. And if I constantly am focusing on what I don't have, then it's not exactly where I want to be.
Sorry to cut you off, but do you find that because you grew up with less, that especially maybe not today, but at least maybe there was some in-between period when you were in college or whatever, that you veer to the other extreme? Because where I come from, I very similar kind of an upbringing. There was money. It was not like we were poor, but I couldn't afford the PlayStation. Or rather, let me not say I. My dad would tell me we can't afford that. But then I realized growing up, just seeing where, and this is again no fault of our parents. It's what the circumstances they come from. My dad's financial situation was always an up-down kind of a thing, and so I think for me, when that uncertainty just crept into my adulthood, where I veered to the extreme, and this is where my question to you is coming from. I veered to the extreme where I was very careful with money. I was very frugal with it. Like if I was given, we grew up in Kuwait, so if I was given 20 KD is about 4,000 rupees in today's value. If I was given 4,000 rupees, I would stretch that for 8 months and 10 months and 12. Like I could do it. I would just stretch it. But that was me. I veered to that extreme. Did you find yourself veering to an extreme, or did you find yourself fearful around money and think I always have to make sure I have enough?
I mean, I think it's been more of a journey, because like when I first started earning, it's quite a small salary 6 years back. I mean, it's good start, no doubt, but but at that point, and since I was living with my parents, you're sort of saving a lot on rent and expenses and everything. So you have you can pretty much call your entire salary your disposable income. So
wait,
I wasn't.
When you say you're living with your parents, you mean your parents came with you to Ireland and lived there? Like what
no, I got my first job when I came back to India.
Oh, you're talking about.
So I finished my masters. Yeah. So, this is 2015, and I was, staying with my parents here in Bangalore. And so, you're saving a good amount of money on rent, expenses, and all of those things that, right now I do pay for, because I don't stay with them anymore.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think now everybody knows why you keep a beard. You just graduated in 2015. How cute. Oh, you're so cute.
No, I actually graduated my master's in 2014.
Oh, 2014? Okay. Just give away your age nonetheless, man. People were supposed to think you're a seasoned hedge fund manager in your 40s.
Oh, I forgot to correct you about that. I'm not a hedge fund manager, guys. Do not listen to anything Abel says. And I'm not even an expert yet.
I know, but you are an expert. That you can't doubt.
I would say I have just the right amount of experience to give people the right amount of advice.
Let's meet there, okay? Because I have benefited from your expert advice.
I know.
Let's meet there. I will agree with that. Yeah, so you
right. So, it's mostly been a journey, because, from that initial mindset of, hey, look, I have my entire monthly income now to spend. Yeah. I have come to a place where, basically every single rupee that we spend, that me and my wife spend, basically is categorized and put separately on a sheet. Exactly, which we will come to later. But the whole point is that it's been, even though I started off in this wealth management industry, it wasn't something that just because I'm working here, it's something that I do. Yeah. But at the same time, it's always, from the moment I started earning, I've always gotten the nudge from my parents about, making sure that I'm always spending it carefully. And obviously that's a good mindset to have, and I think if you hold on to that, regardless of how much you make, you'll actually focus a lot more on it.
Spending it carefully though is very broad. Not dissing your parents.
I would say carefully. But when they say carefully, it's more from an older person mindset.
Exactly.
But I would say
my mom used to always say, "Hey, you gotta save. You gotta save." Now, when I'm like, for me, it's so simple now that I understand investing a little bit.
Right.
For me, I'm like, yes, I gotta save, but at the same time, that money is. It's like saying I have 10 rupees. I keep putting away 1 rupee, and at the end of a year, let's say I've got totally 12 rupees put away. Now, I've saved 12, But could I have grown that 12, which was just lying around somewhere, to become 16? And with that difference of 4 between 12 to 16, I did nothing there. I didn't work for that part. That part miraculously just grew. That's not the part.
Yeah, I mean, that's why
my parents never spoke to me about that delta.
Exactly. I mean, that's why hindsight is always 20/20, right? I mean, you think back and you look like, oh, I could have done so much more and they could have told me so much more. But I mean, that's not how it works, though. I mean, everyone comes up with a different upbringing and we somehow mold ourselves into people that we should be. And even that itself is a journey. And to be honest, the first thing that I bought when I got my salary was a bike that costs 6 times my monthly income. And very happily, I used my dad's credit cards and I paid him back on a monthly basis. So I didn't have to do the same thing with my card. I mean, I didn't even have a card at that point. That's a different story. But I did that for a good first 2 years while I was just, getting started with my work. And I used to just like buy a new phone and then use his card and then pay him back monthly interest free. So, it's great to be able to do that.
You're the second child, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
All these second kids, man, they got no sense of responsibility. They do stupid shit like this. My sister, same. My sister sounds the same. It's just like, I don't know. I veered to the extreme of being reserved. So if I got, even my first check, I was just like, oh no, we got to like bucket this stuff. Again, I'm not thinking invest. I'm just thinking, oh, we shouldn't lose this money. There should be enough at the end of the month. Versus someone like my sister who's like you. I mean, but again, you put on your dad's credit card. My sister would put on someone's debit card and say, it's a gift from the Lord. Thank you.
Well, I'm lucky I didn't go to that extreme. But like I said, I mean, it took me a while to get out of that because, I mean, I eventually stopped doing it. And I don't do it anymore. And I didn't even believe in buying stuff which you basically pay on a monthly basis. Whether it's a phone, whether it's even a car or any of these electronic items that we constantly need the feel to buying. But the point is, I mean, I think it took me about 6 to 12 months after I got my first job to say, hey, okay, you know what? I need to start setting aside money. One, because, hey, I work in this industry. I know what people are doing. I know how it works. Yeah. And two, it makes sense to put aside even a little bit because that makes a lot of difference.
Do you find that you work in an industry with a lot of high net worth individuals? Do you find that there are high net worth individuals who are horrible with their money?
I mean, our job essentially is to direct high net worth individuals, very fairly rich people in the right direction.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Do you find that their personal, I mean, if you have insight into this area, you find that their personal management of money is out of line? Because a lot of people think my salary, the size of my salary dictates how wealthy I am or how. So if I earn a higher salary, I'm doing well. But that's not.
I mean, I would say that's not true at all.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not how much you make; it's how much you actually have in specific places.
And that's a key point. Obviously, we're gonna jump into all this stuff in a bit.
Right. But to answer your question directly, I mean, yes, we do have people. I mean, we do sometimes onboard clients who have had zero experience in, when you say managing money, putting their money in the right places, which is saving in the right places. We've come from. We've started met clients or prospects who basically have money sitting in their account, and these are huge sums. I mean, sitting in their bank account, basically making nothing, essentially losing value the longer you keep it there. And we sort of, open their eyes to what's available out there. And sometimes that is a really tough job because with how the Indian mentality is in general about safer havens, like gold or jewelry or fixed deposit or just keeping money in your bank account. I mean, to open up people to these ideas is great because, like you said, compound return is the 8th wonder of the world because it takes a lot of time to realize how it works, but once you do, it's like magic. So, I mean, but the point is that
we're gonna have to come to this. We're gonna have to come to a place at some point in our conversation where we've already dropped 3 terms. We've dropped compound interest. We've dropped stock portfolio. That's what I've been writing down. What did we drop? We dropped stock portfolio, and we dropped the concept of money losing value sitting around. Now, if someone's a newbie listening in on this conversation, they would have been like, oh, there's the word stock portfolio. I've heard that before. It sounds fancy. What the heck does it mean? It's like, and so that's my hope. Like, I mean, as we veer this conversation in that direction, that we would actually probably be able to unpack and demystify some of this stuff for folks around us. You've also kind of answered my second question, which was, where that shift happened for you. And I think, just in the interest of my side of the coin of where I come from with regards to my money growing up, like I said, very similar to yours, but there were many of these scenarios where I still remember, this is hilarious, but we'd be on these buses, these school buses, and my friends would be talking about how they went to these theme parks, right? And I'd heard enough stories from other people about these theme parks. So if they turn to me and say, "Hey, well, have you ever been here?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I've been there." And then be like, "Which ride did you go on?" And I would actually quote the ride. I've never been to these theme parks a day in my life, but because I've heard of other people talk about the rides, I'm like, "Yeah, I went on that fly simulator. I went on this," and they think I've gone. I was just trying to keep up because, like I said, our financial situation was always up down, and I hated that up down, that uncertainty where everyone else seemed to be stable and having fun, and our family alone didn't seem to be having fun in that sense. I mean, we ate out a lot, but outside of eating out a lot, and that was like because the country could had a good eat out system, if that's even such a word.
Yeah. I mean, actually, that brings up something that I remember, that I mean, eating out, I would say, in a lot of in the Indian context, I would think people. I mean, now it's a different thing. Youngsters go out a lot, but let's say
growing up, it wasn't the case.
It wasn't common, but my parents, regardless of the fact that we weren't poor, but we had sufficient money, but we sort of made an effort to go out as a family and eat out every now and then, and that, I would say, is a sign of just enjoying what we have. I mean, at the end of it, sure, I mean, we can always have this mentality of let's just keep aside money for the future. But I mean, if you're not enjoying it for what you have and what you've earned yourself, I mean, it doesn't make sense to just keep hoarding and hoarding. I mean,
that's not the advice kids nowadays need. Shut up. Don't tell them that.
There's a right way of saving. And I mean, when you say save, obviously you can go into investing. You can talk about being very frugal with money. But yes, exactly. But the point is, I think the way you think about it really defines how you actually live your life with that money in the now bit.
I think there is also, we're talking about this as money, but I think it also ties into a broader construct, a broader value system, where how do you define what success and comfort look like for you? I think, for again, when I compare it to the picture I have of my upbringing, for me, it really came to this place where money became almost like bondage. And I know bondage is an extremely strong word, so probably let's not use the word bondage. People are thinking all kinds of things now. Sex was bondage. That is true. It took a lot of years of therapy to get out of that one. But if you talk about money, crutch, that's a good word. I like that. So money was this crutch, right? And I think that was tied into money being the way I defined a successful, comfortable life. Contentment was defined by the amount of money I had. And that was well up to the age of 28 or maybe even 30. I'm 33 today. So I don't want to give the wrong picture that, I'm not disputing money's importance, as even you and I talk about this. I'm not disputing that. And I'm not disputing what Sid just pointed out, which is, you do need to have that balance, right? It's not all about going frugal, and there's also a place for enjoying what God allows you to have. And I know Sid subscribes to the school of thought, which is the money is not ours. We have the ability to work. We're blessed from beyond, by the good Lord to be able to have the health and the capability to work and earn. But I think we are also called to be good managers or good stewards of whatever is given to us. And I think if we can begin by reshaping the way we define what success looks like and how money correlates to that, I think maybe then we can re-engineer that and then go backwards to, okay, so if we know that this is the picture we're working towards, a healthy picture we're working towards, then what are the things that need to fall in place for us to reach this healthy picture? So I think, do you have a healthy picture, Sid? That's probably the question. What's that healthy picture?
I mean, I think at this point, it really depends on the size of the picture. I think, for some people, that picture might be bigger. But if I'm being honest, I mean, I'm not really thinking beyond the next 3 to 5 years. And even when I started working here, I mean, I think a lot of times we tend to point towards how much we're earning on a monthly or an annual basis and say, hey, this is how I define my success or my worth. And I think it can be really tough to get away from that. But I've never really, I mean, I think I can say I've been blessed enough, and sometimes it can sound arrogant that I'm not focusing on the money despite me making a good amount. But I would say that, I've sort of tried to detach success from money just so that my focus when I'm looking at my job, I mean, obviously we all have certain goals within our work,
Sure.
certain targets. And I think for me, it's always been about, hey, I want to do better than I'm already doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when that doesn't happen, sure, I think it might be linked directly to, and especially in my area of work, it is linked to how much how well I do is linked to how much I make. But, and that's where it becomes tougher. But then I've always tried to intentionally focus on the fact that, okay, you know what, I don't care about that, but I'd rather meet my goals and targets. And then let's see what's the fruit of that success. And obviously, it's taken time because, sure, I mean, I started off with a small salary 6 years back, but it's been
If I can venture, take a stab at what you're saying is essentially you don't necessarily have a picture, but at the same time, if your basic needs are met and you have some left over for, like, let's say for a moment where you want to go on a holiday and you have the flexibility to do that, that for you is good.
Right. I mean,
you're not looking for the BMW, but you're looking to not feel restricted.
Exactly. I mean, I think, and that again comes back to how I felt probably when I was younger. It's like I felt restricted and obviously I didn't have the true picture of what my parents were going through, what was the financial situation, but there was this feeling of restriction thing. I couldn't have what I saw around me. And I think just to look at it in terms of saying, hey, how comfortable you feel now is probably, like you said, I mean, you can cover your basic expenses. You can cover a little bit beyond that, where you can enjoy some leisurely activities on a monthly basis.
Speaking of which, how's that new car working out for you?
Well, it's sitting in the garage.
Exactly, during the lockdown. Look at that. What a shit investment.
Exactly. I mean, to be able to afford those things and, and say, okay, and that's beyond my... Okay, I would say in certain cases, car is a necessity, but sure, I mean, I could do without one.
I love how you said exactly when I said, what a shit investment. I was just like,
I went for a second car, so I would say that's way better than, in my opinion, going for a brand new one. So
Sure. Yeah, no,
I mean, I think we've been able to afford things just beyond what we really need to survive.
Sure.
And I think that is important, where you can, say, I feel comfortable enough because, I'm not like living from income to income, but I'm sort of enjoying what I've earned at the same time. Which, at least in my opinion, that's sort of the definition of comfortable along with successful.
Fair enough. I think for me, right, I define it a little differently. For me, it's number one, the end goal is always, I don't want to end up, especially in my old age, without options. And when I say options, I'm talking about something as basic as medical emergency comes up and I am not worrying about the money in that moment. Like a simple example is, and mind you, to plan for this particular example, I needed to have begun like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. A simple example is, we recently had the second baby and for some reason, some category of room that my insurance doesn't cover wasn't available. So you only could go higher category or you could go lower category. I didn't have to think twice. Now, with that, and with that being said, it's not because I had enough in my bank. If I'm being very clear in the interest of full disclosure, a couple of years ago, I was living check to check. And I was faced with a similar decision. I still took the highest category possible. I still took the deluxe room. Over then, I was like, Jesus will bail me out. That was my logic. And I still think whether it was that back then, where I spent all the money I had, obviously putting myself in an uncomfortable position, or whether I'm here today. Either way, I think the core of where I believe my success comes from today doesn't have anything to do, is not linked directly to how much is in my bank account or how I feel about myself today. is not linked to how much is in my bank account. And
Right.
that has a lot to do with my faith as well, which I'm not diving into right now. But I do believe that whether I have more or whether I have less, it doesn't matter. With that said, because I also believe at the same time we are still called to be responsible and faithful with the little that we have, it felt different this time. This time around, I still made the same decision, but I had stuff lying around. And I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to not have to stick your hand out somewhere and say, hey, can you bail me out of this? Whether it's your dad or your mom or whoever else it might be, and you will find someone with a good heart who will stretch their hand out probably. But do you really want to be the person who's giving, or do you want to be the person who's taking? And that actually leads me to my second thing, which I think for me, the picture of success was always, I'm able to give to people in need. And that was so strong because, again, that comes from a place of, I know what it feels like to be in want. There was a short number of years in between in my adult life where I literally lived hand to mouth, check to check. And if I made money for that month, that was good. That's the life of being a full-time comedian, I guess. A full-time comedian who has no basis in finances. Let me be clear. It's not because I chose comedy. There are lots of comedians making shitloads of money. I think in my case, I was making good money. I just never was wise with how I saved it. I lived check to check. So I think all this to say that the picture is different today. And there's another reason as well, which is I didn't want my kids to feel less than. The feeling that I went through, I don't want my kids to go through. I do want to teach. I do want to do the Gordon Ramsay, right? Where my wife and I are sitting in business class and we say, sorry, you guys get economy class. Do you know he actually does that? His kids apparently, like, he only buys his kids economy. He says, dude, I went to school in the bus. You are chauffeur driven. The least I can do is teach your ass the value of money. So go sit in economy. When you're old enough, you can enjoy it. I was like, of course, Kavi is like, you dare.
I'd feel quite bummed if my parents asked me to sit in economy while they were sitting in business class.
I got a twisted sense of humor. I don't mind doing that. But at the same time, it's like, Kavi says this all the time. Kavi's my wife, by the way. Kavi says this all the time. You dare do that to our children. You dare do that.
I mean, it's sort of going against what you just said, because I mean, the thing is to not allow them to be in a place where we were. I mean, it's not that our parents
did us
any differently.
Designing that for them. I don't mind designing that. Right. I don't want it to come from a place of my helplessness. Like, they're helpless because I'm helpless. No. You're helpless.
It's the choice you're making. It's different. Exactly. That's because it completely depends on your money mentality.
I am freaking insane. I want you to suffer. Okay, that's my motto.
Right.
School of hard knocks.
I really think that I do really love how you put it, in terms of being able to give and at the same time, just not having the next generation feel the way we did. And I think eventually, obviously, subsequently, everyone who comes after us is hopefully going to do better than, how we did before. I mean, in both of our cases, that seems to be so far. And, that the hope is that it continues that way. But I did like what you pointed out about, what you see in your bank. And the funny thing is, to be honest, like, even now, both of us having known what we know about money and how we set it aside, how we put it in good places, our bank balances are still going to be low because good money, what you need is actually sitting in the right places where you can't see it in your account. So it's one thing is that
you can't touch it. Well.
Exactly. You don't have access to it. I mean, if you wanted to, you could take it out, but it is more of a hassle than just withdrawing money from your bank, which is great. I mean, at the end of it, I think we should have just the right amount in the bank account for your monthly stuff, but everything which is beyond the month should always be sitting somewhere, where you cannot see it when you check your account balance. So,
Yeah. With these being, your respective end goal and my respective end goal, right? Where does someone begin in today's context? And I can again speak from what we've just spoken and what we've done together, right, over the past couple of months, and just having interactions. I think number one is just being very, very honest. With you, and I know that's really hard. So I say this very carefully, to find someone you trust, whom you can actually have a candid conversation with about your money and say, I have exactly this amount in my bank account. What do I do? I have found that being able to tell somebody that is very helpful. Not just anybody, but I mean someone who's going to be able to do something with that information.
Right.
Like in your case, you're like, okay, so you have like $1,000 in your bank account. Let's see what we can do with that. Right. I have found that being honest about where you are today is fine, and that honesty extends to not just being candid about your money situation, but I think it also extends to being candid about what you want out of it. And allowing someone to speak to that if it's jaded, if it's skewed.
I mean, I think we have a very unique relationship, and if we can share a lot of stuff with each other that we don't with other people. So I think that's important to acknowledge, because sometimes, and I do have people coming to me quite often, and not everyone's going to just say, hey, this is how much I have in my account. Most of the times, I mean, people come with saying, hey, this is how much I make. How can I basically put that to the best use? I mean, and it could be someone who is interning. It could be, and we have so many young guys in our church who are either just getting out of college, or we have people in their mid-20s getting into a better job than before and making more than they used to. So I feel like the first question.
Yeah, this is true for some of us at least. I agree. The first step is to really just be responsible, take that accountability. And the second thing, it's part of that first step itself, is to say, what is my current trend? What's my current activity around money today? So I'm using the word current activity. I'm using current word activity. Now let me use the word that most people use to say, how do we track that? It's called a budget. Now, people freak out when they hear the word budget, but budget is essentially just that. It tells you how your money is moving.
Yeah, it's not a word that the government uses only. I mean, it's something that all of us should be using. Yeah. But I feel like before we get to a budget, I think like you said, I mean, taking stock, I think a lot of people, you have to realize where they come from, because, and especially now, like you're talking about people making, there are people literally making millions off of crazy asset classes like cryptocurrency, and, doing so well. And even the stock market, people are doing really well. And I think a lot of people are taking stock because they're like, hey, look, I've been spending this money for whatever I feel like, but look, my friends, my colleagues, or my family, they're somehow actually making more money by putting it in interesting places that they haven't known about so far. And I think that's good, because even if an asset class like crypto, which is super risky and pretty close to gambling, brings you to a decision where you say, I need to manage my money better, I think that's good enough, because that's the first step. And you're saying, hey, essentially, I need to get my stuff together.
I need to manage my money better. I need to manage my money better.
I mean,
the casino, everybody.
Sure, even if that's the first thought process, but if it eventually brings you to the right decision of, hey, I need to put aside some money for my own good, I think that's just the best step that you can take.
That agreed, completely agreed. I think going past the fancy words you use, asset class and all that stuff, like dodging that, I think to the essence of what you're saying, to be able to acknowledge that there are ways by which we can increase this money. That's fine. And I think and why you would want to increase that money always ties back to what's that end goal for you. But I think we can establish that there is no person in this world who says, I think I'm happier with less. I've never met somebody who says I'm happier with less money. I have met people who say, I don't need
I think
much.
There are people who say that, but we haven't met them.
And let me flip that. That's exactly where I was going. There are people who say, I don't need this much. I can do less, right? I don't need the BMW. I can do the Hyundai Verna second hand, or whatever that car is, right? That you picked up. But then that's you making that choice. You could have very well gone for a new car, but it's just, hey, no, I'm fine with less. I don't need something like that. And I think that in itself is a delta to go from I want this stuff, I want the Xbox, I want to no, let's change that. Why do you want? Why do you want all that stuff? What is it doing for you?
Right.
Rephrasing that to whatever you and I articulated sounds noble enough, at least for the sake of this conversation, definitely sounds noble. So let's say, okay, if I'm reframing that to, I want my kids to have options. I don't want to be in a position later in life where someone comes to me saying I have a need and I can't give them. That's different. Then you're like, okay, I know what I'm earning today I don't have enough to go around, but maybe there's a way I can build that. And that's where we come to these things that we call assets. As the name suggests, let's just go by the English. An asset is something that's working for you, right? And so what Sid called asset classes are these different instruments
Buckets.
or buckets that we can put our money into where it would potentially grow. That's what we mean by asset classes. Yes, we've explained one word. That's good. So we started with this end goal, and we say we know what we want this end goal to be, and most likely for whatever those reasons are in that end goal, we want to increase our money, and there are ways to do that. Now, before we can even get there, there is an honest assessment of where we are. Because we might need 10 crores for the end of our life, 10 crore rupees, which is, what's the dollar value against it?
$1.5 million.
$1.5 million. I need $1.5 million for retirement. And maybe you're earning just like 10,000 rupees today. That's unrealistic, right? So we need to look at this stuff practically. So let's assume for a second that your income continues to grow because you're doing well in your job, the stuff that you earn, it will continue to grow. Your income earning potential will continue to grow. If we make that assumption in this conversation, then I would say the first place to look, and again, I'm basing this purely off what I have done and I know what Sid has done for himself, is we need to first understand what's going on today. And the budget is where we begin. The budget is such a simple exercise. I think there's of course the four basics, right? There's food, shelter, not clothing. What was it? Utilities. Your food, shelter, utilities, and there's a fourth one.
I think you can go even simpler than that and just put it into two buckets, which is like fixed expenses and variable expenses. Fixed is something that you would absolutely need
have to
survive.
That
could be different for everyone because, like I said, in some cases you might be living with your parents, so rent isn't important, but food and utilities is. In some cases, like, where we probably, like me right now, where, I'm paying rent and utilities and internet and all of these things, if you want to call Netflix and Hotstar as your necessities, because you can't survive without entertainment these days. So I think you could easily put that in. Okay, I'm joking. That goes in variable, not fixed, guys.
You can't survive without anything. Right. Yeah, as you can tell, he's still very early in his career.
Right, but I think those fixed expenses are important because yes, we can put them into food, we can put them into fuel or utilities or any kind amount of necessities that depend on where you live and how you live. But essentially, I think once. It's not even easy to get there, to be honest, because until you start this whole budgeting process, you're just spending money where you feel like, depending on your requirement, whether it's a need or a want.
Like I need bread today, so I go out and pick up bread versus, you have data to look at, or you have numbers to look at of the last 3 months, and you say, oh, I buy bread 4 times in the month. Or something like that. And that allows you to then set a benchmark for, okay, so that's how much bread I need in the house, not how much bread I want. Now, if you were in Germany, it could be a conversation about how much bread you want, because they've got bloody everything from strudels to whatnot. But
exactly.
But like how much?
I think. Right. And I think it's important because, like you said, it takes a while to get there. You could start budgeting or, putting down what you spend on a sheet, piece of paper, on an app, whatever it is that's comfortable. You could put it on, but it would take you anywhere between 3 to 6 months to come to a point in your life where you're like, oh man, I've been spending a lot more on this category.
Wait. So you're saying you need 3 to 6 months worth of data just to evaluate your life?
Yes, because I would say that not evaluate your life. I would say evaluate your decisions around money. Because the thing is, once you have reached 3 to 6 months, because that's a pattern, I would say, because it allows room for these one-off expenses that do turn up every now and then. It could include a flight you have to take, or maybe like a car insurance premium that you pay, or like a life insurance premium that you pay, which are all absolutely necessities and fixed expenses, but they don't come often. They don't come regularly as like rent or your utilities. So you do have to put them in buckets, and eventually you'll realize that some buckets are overflowing and you need to like put them back in place.
So here's something that actually comes up when you're talking about this whole concept of budgeting. If you're a salaried employee, it's a lot easier because money is coming in frequently at such and such date. you're able to track this money going out and coming in. I mean, there's a cycle to it. Versus if you're a non-salaried employee, if you live like the way I did for a good 10 years, which was, you got your gigs, you got paid, and those came in irregular frequencies, right? And some gigs had more money and some gigs had less money. Do you think it's still possible to establish some kind of method to that madness? And if there is, like, what is that?
I think that I mean, it essentially comes down to what you want to do with it. I mean, see, it took you a while to reach a point where you're like, okay, you know what, I want to do better with money. Because regardless how much you make in these freelance or one-off gigs or, money that isn't a regular stream, I mean, you can always decide to say that, hey, I still want to put it down and say this is how much I spent. Because it comes back to how you were brought up. And, if you've always been used to a discipline around money, or at least be more cautious around it, just in the sense that, okay, you're putting it in the right places, or at least you have an idea of where your money is going. See, it's great, and sometimes people who don't get regular streams of income get huge chunks in one go, and that probably sustains them for maybe even 6 months. I think, yes, it's a much bigger challenge for them to do it, but I feel like, I mean, they still have 6 months of money where they can jot down every single thing that they spend it towards.
And so I think then the advice would be, if you are non-salaried like I was for the longest time, now I'm both salaried and non-salaried. But if you are predominantly non-salaried, then I think it would be really great to look at your expenses. Don't focus on how frequently the income's coming in. Obviously, the more frequently it comes in, the better, and in bigger checks, the better. But you can actually still distinguish and determine a pattern of how the money is going out. And I think that's what's important. And that's probably where this conversation is centered around. How is the money going out? Because we've already made the assumption your money is going out. Okay, that's a good place to begin. And I think
that's a great point, because I would say that focusing on where it's going is more important, because and I think I forgot to bring this point up earlier, is that regardless of how much money you're making, like, I know every single year you could potentially make more depending on increments or maybe when job changes, but if you keep your standard of living the same, and I don't think it's important to change that based on your income. I mean, your expenses are going to surely change, because of obviously rising expenses. I mean, everything changes. But if you're earning, let's say you're earning about 25,000 a month, and if that becomes 40 in the next year, and that 40 becomes 60, I mean, sure, you can increase your expenses towards a certain extent, because in general, all expenses are going to go up on an annual basis. But I don't think you have to, in sync with your income, increase your expenses just because you're spending every single rupee. I think that's important, because when you're focusing on your outward expenses, I mean, whatever is going out of your thing, I mean, that's the more important aspect of budgeting rather than what's coming in. Unless
the only exception to that would be, unless your picture of success is, I want to scale. Right? And some people have that. Like I said, oh wait, no, that was not in this introduction. That was in the first take that we've deleted now, where I listen to a lot of hip hop music, and like every third song's about money's the motivation, money's the conversation. Yeah, money the shit, money sexy. I want a sex money. Yes, whatever. Like half the lyrics are just that, and but that's. And I love the music, obviously. That's motivating me to get 5 more reps in somehow. But when I actually sit and think about it at a philosophical level, I'm like, nah. That's just not me. But someone else. Now, would I judge someone else who wants that type of life? No, I wouldn't. But I think I wouldn't know if that's necessarily the healthiest way to look at money. That I can confidently say. Or if that's the healthiest picture to have, which is, I am going to scale my life up to a degree where I can live it up. I mean, I'm not judging even if you do say that.
Exactly. I mean, the thing is, we shouldn't be judging them, because I would say that, I mean, a lot of these people
come from
live the way that you're saying.
Come from hard circumstances.
Yes, I mean, exactly. And it's not even about being hard. Sorry. I mean, I would say it's not even about coming from the most dire circumstances. It's just that they've never been told that there's something better there. I mean, one is that your parents never told you. Our schools don't teach us about it. I mean, so you have to somehow reach a stage where, hey, you either found out through a friend or you found out through a maybe TV advertisement or something of that sort. So, I mean, the way it is set up here is that this is not something that's basic knowledge. It should be. This is something that everyone should know growing up, but it isn't. And because of that, some people, just out of the fact that they don't know there's something better out there, continue to live the life that they're living. And yes, you're right. There's no point in judging them because it's not just ignorance. It's just like they have no clue about it.
Which is fair. So cool. Okay, so we're saying you need to have data to be able to evaluate how your money is going out. It's more important to know how your money is going out than it is coming in, right? Unless you're a drug dealer, then you might want to know where your money is coming in from. But outside of that, you need to know where your money is going out. And then once you have that idea, so Sid recommends 3 to 6 months. Let's go with the certified financial planner's advice here. If you're a miser like me, you probably need only 3. But if you are someone who's got an irregular habit, you've got a habit of spending irregularly, let me put it like that, then maybe 6 months actually works better for you. But once you have that in mind, then you can start to make this plan around, okay, now what number do I need to live a comfortable life? And you have a definition of comfort. For some people, comfort is I will live in a hut. That's completely fine. For some people, comfort may be I need to have at least 2 vacations a year. I can live without the vacations. It doesn't affect me. But different people have a different measure of what a comfortable life is.
Yeah.
I think if you can, and again, it's like Sid said, it also depends on your circumstance. You may be in a position where you can't afford some aspects of the comfortable life. That's okay. I think to acknowledge that it's okay, I can eventually work up to that. If that's a desire you have, I don't think it's wrong, based off the heels of what we just said, I don't think it's wrong to have those desires. But I think at the same time, you've got to know very realistically what's possible for you in your situation. So taking a look at that, you determine what that benchmark is. Now, once you have that benchmark of what a comfortable life looks like, and the way I define comfortable is the kids have what they need. We have food, and the food is home cooked, not ordered in. That is not considered part of our definition of comfortable life. We're trying to be as cautious with our money as we can because we know we're not earning in bucket loads. We define comfort as, home cooked meals, being able
to be honest, some people, the fact that they can order in regularly is also a comfortable life.
But again, I'm talking about the conservative side of that definition, right? I think because I don't think anyone has a problem establishing the extreme of what comfortable looks like, right? I'm trying to establish what at a base mark, at a base level, what a benchmark would look like for comfort. So this is how I would define it, especially around this eating out, because eating out was a big deal for us. We spent a lot of our money in our initial years when we didn't know how to manage it. I think Swiggy made a killing off us. In those initial years of our marriage. Now, obviously, we cook a lot more at home. So that's where we're careful. We gave up Netflix, contrary to what you did. And here's what we did. I'll be honest, it's a bit of a cheap move. I gave up Netflix, but I'm using my best friend's Netflix.
It's a cheap move. It's a very strategic move because you're using the same services but not spending your own money.
Not spending the money. So again,
and you're not doing it without letting your friend know. So
In my defense, the thing is, we gave up Netflix with the intention of never watching it again, and then Netflix released a lot of these really good specials, and I'm just like, man, I just want to watch that one special. Actually, hey, bud, can you give me your Netflix password? Okay, it stayed. Now I'm on Suits the entire season. I'm going through seasons of Suits, and that's when this thought cropped back up. Should I pay for Netflix again? I'm technically now using the guy's Netflix so much more frequently.
But that brings up an interesting thought, and I'm probably digressing, but just thinking about
that's fine. We've only taken 45 minutes just to talk about budgeting.
But I was just thinking about how we grew up. You obviously, especially in India, I would say, let's say 10, 15 years back, we didn't have streaming services at that point. So if you had to watch a movie, you either watch it in the cinemas or you pay a buttload of money to...
Can you hear the baby?
Yeah. But do you need to go?
No. Don't worry, baby. We're keeping Netflix. Don't cry. It's for you.
I mean, you would need a buttload of money to actually buy a DVD or, even rent it. And or on the other side where...
Cable was a big deal. Having cable was a big
Exactly. And when I'm getting at is like, and for me who have grown up gaming, I mean, I didn't have access to buying the actual game because we used to just download it illegally off torrents. But I have come to a place where, I did that growing up.
Please note the face and the name. Siddharth Menon lives in Bangalore, India.
You can't track it back to me because it is like a decade ago. But I've come to a place where I actually purchase games now, or I pay for streaming services, or you have the option of buying movies every now and then, which I feel like I'm at least, not doing what I was doing before.
You're not a
because
pirate anymore.
I think,
You're a changed man.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it feels good that, okay, you're supporting something that you enjoy. And at the same time, you don't have to rely on... obviously illegal piracy and to just enjoy the stuff that you do, because it wasn't that easy. One was just the accessibility of it, that wasn't so easily accessible here. But the second thing is that now that the option is available, and even buying games online is so simple these days, you can just buy it with your own money and download it without having to worry about the CD key not working later.
I'm waiting for the day when blockchain comes into play and no one's able to do any sort of piracy anymore. And then you will find one guy who's cracked it.
I mean, there'll always be people who'll find a way.
Oh man, that's going to be trippy. But I mean, I completely get what you're saying. I think we each have a different definition of comfort, and I think we need to really clearly define it within reasonable measure. Is where I'm basically getting at. Okay, so let's assume right now you've been able to track it for 6 months. You've got an idea, you've got a number in your mind. You say 100,000 rupees, 1 lakh rupees is what I need to live. If you're a family of 4 or 5 and you live in modest 2 BHK accommodation, whatever jazz, I need this much to live comfortably in a month, provide for the kids, all that. Once you've established all those things, where would someone go from there? One of the first things I thought of was the emergency fund.
Right. And I mean, like, we come back to, it's sort of a debate between, I mean, it's in India, this is the debate. And I would say, at least for me, it's a choice between an emergency fund and tax planning. Because
that was
important to note that, I mean, before, and we don't even have to jump into the details, but good tax planning, and that means setting aside some money to the limits that are allowed by the government towards.
So let's pause there. Let's backtrack. Why tax planning even? I think you need to explain how our tax system is working. I mean, without getting into details, but like basically,
you have to jump into that. But okay, I would say that
let me do it because I know you will get technical. Look, people, the government wants your damn money, okay? And they are going to do anything and everything to get your money. Now, this is not true of just our country. It's true of any country in the world. Now, in some countries, though, you get to see that tax money that you're paying the government come back to you. In our case, I pay the government and my road is still shit. So,
yes.
In such a scenario, right, when you take the income you make, a certain portion of it is going to go to the government. But the government themselves give you a way out by which you don't have to pay them as much, where you can take your money and instead of paying them that amount, you can invest that. And so the amount...
That's not completely true.
Not completely true.
In some places, you are actually investing with the government directly because some forms of those tax-saving investments do go directly to them. I mean, I'm going to dumb it down like to really simple terms. And essentially, the same government, the same government that's trying to charge you income tax is also giving you legal ways to reduce the amount of tax that you pay. And why this debate between emergency fund and comes is because if you plan it the right way, you can essentially take home more money, which is your net pay, which is after your taxes and your all this EPF, PPF kind of stuff, what the companies deduct and all of that stuff. So the point is that if you can manage to basically take home more by planning it well, then it just brings you back to the fact that, I can also save towards an emergency fund at a faster pace.
Let's put it in numbers. So originally I'm making 100,000 rupees and my tax, what I was giving the government.
I can't hear you say 100,000 rupees, man. I'm an Indian, so I hear 1 lakh.
1 lakh, 1 lakh.
So 1 lakh rupees.
I'm just saying it for the benefit of those who sit in other countries as well, right? So
well, for them, then 100,000 rupees would be about $1,500.
Which is also true. So without converting it, just looking at it in terms of ones and zeros. So if you were making 100,000 rupees and the government said, I want 25,000 of that. Now, if you want to pay me less, you can actually take a portion of your income and you can put it elsewhere. Think of it this way. The advantage in that moment is you can take this money, put it elsewhere. You will still get that money back. So instead of paying, instead of it originally being, I have 75,000 left over after I have paid 25,000 to the government. Now what you're saying is, okay, I will give 10,000 out of my 100,000 to the government. The government says, okay, if you're going to give me 10,000, you don't have to pay me 25,000 now. You just need to pay me 20,000. Now, yes, granted, there's an extra 5,000. It sounds like, oh no, but I've still given extra 5,000. But remember, that 10,000 is entirely still yours, depending on where you invest. Like I said, there are places where the government also does co-invest with you, and maybe they get a cut of that. But I'm not considering that scenario just for the lack of.
Right. I mean, I would say that another way to look at it is that suppose you're just making, let's say you're making like 1 lakh a year, forget a month, but by putting aside that 20, or let's say the example is 25 here, if the government is allowing you to put 25 aside in certain places where you can reduce your tax, then even though you're earning a lakh, you're actually paying tax only on 75 after reducing the 25,000. So which is a win-win, because not only are you saving tax, but you're also getting to put that as an investment, which is actually making more money for you. So in no scenario is this a lose-lose or a win-lose. This is completely a win-win. So if you can, afford it, and if it is under, your bandwidth to set aside money for these tax saving things, because most of these tax saving things, depending on where you put it, can sometimes have a lock-in, and that's the biggest aspect of these tax saving, is that there is a lock-in. Like the smallest is 3 years, the longest is 15 years.
So when you say lock-in, again, because it's a term, when we say lock-in, we mean you put this money away.
You can't touch it.
That's what you mean.
You can't take it out. You can always put more, but you can't touch it for that specific amount of time, which means it's staying and it's being invested, but only once that period is over can you take it out or do something else with it. And so that's a good way of looking at it. And
I've noticed for those who don't have discipline, putting your money away in instruments or buckets where, or like Sid said, in assets where they have these lock-in periods, the best way to do it. Like, even if you want that money, you can't touch it.
Yeah, and for some people, that is really the beginning of investments. I mean, before they even think of this.
It is for me, at least.
Yeah, like, and I know it is for you, because that's how we planned it for you. And it's important because, before we get into the details of the tax saving, I do want to touch on the other side, which is your emergency fund, which is, that we have spoken about 3 to 6 months of tracking your expenses. The emergency fund is entirely focused on what you need. So it is basically equation. Is an equation based on expenses, not income. So you could be earning 1 lakh, but if you're spending only 75,000 a month, and this you basically find out, and 75,000 is your fixed expenses. It includes your rent, it includes your utilities, it includes any kind of payments you cannot stop or cancel. So if you are only spending 75,000 on those fixed expenses, then you just multiply that 75 by 6 times, because that's 6 months, and you have your emergency fund. So 75 basically into 6 is about 3.75 lakhs.
You're saying an emergency fund is something we need for emergencies. In times of emergencies, an emergency can be defined as anything from a medical crisis all the way through to a loss of job and whatever that might be.
Yes.
And in such a scenario,
I would say that there has to be a very important emphasis on your definition of emergency, so that, hey, you don't think that, hey, the new iPhone's come out and I need to get that's an emergency. So I pull my money out.
I need it
right now. So, I mean, it's something like you said, if you lose your job, or if it's a medical expense that comes beyond what your insurance can cover, or if it's
you don't have
emergency flight that you need to take, or if you don't have insurance, or if something that basically absolutely cannot come out of your income, because obviously you were setting aside that for your regular stuff. And if we're doing a 6-month period because that seems comfortable, you can always go for a larger amount if it's
I
within
know
your
different
bandwidth.
financial planners recommend different terms. Some recommend 6 months, some recommend 3, even actually some may go as low as 3. But I think what Sid is saying is actually really comfortable. But when you're at the beginning of this entire journey, I'll tell you how I did it. I think in the interest of full disclosure, I actually first got the tax part of it sorted because I recognized very quickly after my conversations with Sid that, I need to actually ensure that I'm getting as much money per month. Because how this is done is, the tax calculation is done is not at the end of the year. If you declare or you say, this is how I intend to invest over the course of the year, which is an investment declaration, your company or whatever organization you work for, they actually calculate your salary based off that and they actually give you. And so in some cases, instead of getting just the 75,000 that's owed to you, you might get 85,000.
I just want to point out that, the investment declaration is super important because it made the beginning of the year for a reason that, you get more on a monthly basis. But the investment declaration also includes the rent that you pay. That is so important to note that because under the Indian laws, you can claim a certain amount of rent that you pay as a tax deduction. A lot of people don't realize this and then they don't declare it and they actually pay more tax than they need to. And the flip side of declaring at the beginning of the year is that you don't declare it and you basically file your returns the next year and you claim a huge amount as refund because you've paid more tax than you should. But I would agree with your idea where you declare it at the beginning so that you get home
more
on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And is more important.
Yeah. And that more per month is what then works towards the other parts that we were talking about, which is, I can take that extra 10,000 and put it in an emergency fund. I can start building an emergency fund. So to the point I was going to make earlier, which is once I had this tax planning part of it out of the way, I actually put away money for 1 month. I didn't put away money for 3 or 6 because it brings me to my next point. I also had debt to clear. So for me, my emergency fund, it was more important for me to clear my debt first. But at the same time, I do need money for an emergency. That's also true. So I said, okay, I'm just going to have up to 1 month's worth of money. And maybe actually we could, just to make people a little more comfortable, I'm comfortable with 1 month. But I think maybe for people's personal peace of mind, maybe you could say, let me get 2 months worth of expenses. So it's that 75,000 multiplied by 2, 1,50,000, 150,000 rupees. You say, that's how much I'm going to keep in emergency. In emergency, it's not to be touched. It's only for emergency. And when Sid was talking about emergency flight, it's not, I need a holiday today. It's my grandmother died, somebody is dead.
Exactly.
Or I'm eloping from my wife, she's got an axe to my head or some jazz. It has to be legitimate emergency, right? So that's money you put away, you don't touch, but you determine what your emergency fund looks like. If you have no debt, then like Sid said, you can say 6 months worth of my expenses and you have data to prove your expenses.
And I think that's an important point that you bring up. And I do subscribe to Dave Ramsey's thought on this.
Yeah, I got that from Dave Ramsey.
Do not put anything in an emergency fund, not do any tax planning until you clear your debt. So if you owe money to people, or if you I know you can. I know.
No, you need to do tax planning. See, because how I'm paying my debt off.
Let me complete, because I would say this is not dependent on your financial thing, but this is more to do with your mental health. Because having money owed to whoever it is, it could be a family member, it could be a corporate, it could be a bank, but having that on your head can take a toll on a lot of people. So if we're talking about having a journey where you're feeling good about the decisions that you're making about money, and I know that might not necessarily be a realistic situation for everyone, but I would say as much as possible, clear your debts first and then move on to places where you're putting money aside for yourself for the future. And I know you will disagree with me on certain points here, I'm just coming from the perspective of having that.
I don't know. Let me just jump in there. I don't disagree with that at all. I think I was just disagreeing with the measures. And what I mean by the measures is, like, I would not wait to do, and I think this is the point you were exactly making right now. And this is where I subscribe to what you're saying. I would not build up the 6-month emergency fund and then look at my debt.
Because then you just use your emergency fund.
Yeah, that's easy. The whole thing's just going to go there, right? I mean, who knows who my debt is owed to? See, if it's a family member who's understanding, they'll be like, no, take your time, pay me back whenever. If it's a bank with a credit card loan or whatever it is, a credit card
with interest,
that's going to keep. They're going to just add on more and more to your dues, right? So I think over there, I'm completely with you. The place where I was, trying to make a case for tax planning was to say that sometimes when we plan our tax, because we get that extra 10,000 we were talking about, from 75,000 now it's 85,000. That extra 10,000 can go towards paying debt, even if you don't want to. But at the same time, you can't be in a position where you don't have a base minimum emergency fund. This is
Dave. I agree with that.
I think for those who are uninitiated, Dave Ramsey is a financial planner in the US. Not everyone, agrees with his philosophy or way of doing things, because, like he says, he's learned to do this as God's and grandma's ways of handling money. That's how he calls it. But he's very simple. And I like simple, especially in an area which can get very complicated, which is money. And this is how he looks at it. He says a base minimum emergency fund of $1,000, which is actually roughly about 1.5 lakhs.
No. $1,000 is about 75 grand.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So what I did, sorry, my bad. It was 75 grand. I found 75 grand too small an amount. So I kept 1.5 lakhs as my emergency.
If the rich guy, too small an amount.
Please, man. If an emergency happens, I don't want to be like, well, here's the money, but here's the noose around my neck too. I don't want that, right? I just thought it would be good to have 2 months. And I had the luxury. So the debts I have are things I owe family. I mean, like family members who've told me, take your time with it. Even if you never pay us, we don't care. So clearly it was things they gave me as gifts, which I don't want to keep. So I'm saying, no, I want to pay you back. So I call that a debt. And so in such a scenario, because I had that luxury, I said, I still need to get the taxes right so that I'm getting the most amount of money per month. Yeah. And because that money I'm already, and again, how am I getting the most amount of money per month? I'm already investing. So I've kind of jumped ahead a bit. I'm also kind of investing, which we'll come to. But my base right here is I'm getting the most amount of money. Okay, so now that I'm getting the most amount of money, I need my emergency fund. I've built that thing up. Now that's done. Now let me attack my debt. That is how I've structured it. But to Sid's point, are you saying that maybe we just be happy with the money we get, ignore the tax planning and clear the debt first? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I only came from the perspective that it's a lot of relief and it's a weight lifted off your shoulder when you do not owe anyone anything.
Agreed with you.
And so sometimes I think it is important to set up a base amount, and it could be $1,000 in US terms, or if you're talking about let's start with something as small as 50, because sometimes that can be a huge amount of money for someone who requires an emergency kind of a situation.
Correct. Mine is for a family of 4. Mine is for a family.
So it would depend on everyone, and you have to make a decision about how much is going to be your emergency, or at least your base amount, depending on your situation and how much you earn and all that. So let's say you have like a base amount, but then, like you said, you can sort of work parallelly towards clearing that debt and also, building up certain amounts of emergency fund. Now, I wouldn't completely say that it should always be like an equal balance. Hey, you put some here in the emergency fund, you put some here to clear debt. I would say the focus should be more on clearing a debt after you set up the base amount. But eventually, you should get to a point where you have cleared up the debt as much as possible, because how you clear debt is that.
My question remains though: what's the order? Is it? I've established how much it's not. So is it? Do I focus on And this is from your view as a certified financial planner for Indians, right, living in this economy. How do you recommend it be done? Do you recommend it be done as look at the tax planning first, then clear the debt, then build the emergency fund? Or are you saying, forget the tax planning, whatever money you get, clear the debt, then we'll focus on your tax planning, then we'll
Right.
focus on emergency.
I think it's not a formulaic thing because of you don't know how much the extent of debt can be. Now, see, you can come
What if it's a lot?
from a.
What if it's a lot of debt? I've got a
I would say
student
then
loan, foreign. I went abroad for a couple of years, and that's a loan I'm paying. What does that look like then?
I mean, if it's a loan and you've basically already taken up the commitment, I mean, you'd rather pay it off in the time frame that you've given. I mean, I would say in that situation where basically you are committed to paying a certain amount of money to the bank because you've taken a loan, pay that off whenever you can. I mean, as on a monthly basis. But if
that's
you
priority
if you chance upon the situation where basically you have some lump sum that's like a huge chunk of money that comes in your way, or you manage to save more in that month, push it towards the debt. I mean, there is obviously logistical requirements around that, because even sometimes prepaying a loan can have charges, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So sometimes they don't want you to pay back on time. So those are things to consider. But I would say there are different ways to do it. I would say tax planning shouldn't come in the priority here between these three things. I would say that let's focus on the emergency fund, let's focus on clearing the debt. And then, because tax planning in a way is a form of investing. So it's not just declaring, hey, this is how much I want to save a year, but this is saying, this is how much I set aside. So because
so you look at tax planning as an investing thing. So I think, I wish we had said this at the beginning. We might saved ourselves like 15 minutes of a conversation.
No, because that's why I kept the tax planning as an investment thing as a separate discussion for later, because there are so many ways of doing it, which we will get to. But in all of those forms, it is an investment. You're putting aside your money in different places where you could earn more, and hence that's part of a journey that should come after your emergency fund.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I see how you're doing it. So let's ignore everything I just said. You
don't have to ignore what you said, because people can find ways to do it. And like I said, it's not a formula. I mean, if you can work around all those three things in a way that works for you, sure, go for it. But at the end, it should be towards a goal that you've set for yourself in those three things.
Correct. And in my case, that was like unique. Like I said, my scenario is a place where no one's expecting me to pay them back, but I want to pay them back. So at the same time, I have a way of doing it, which is, okay, I'm not focusing on my emergency fund right now. I built like a base minimum, but I'm also investing. And oh, by the way, when I do my tax savings, some of my investments are actually towards these debts as well. So I've already committed those investments I'm making. I say, hey, I'm investing this amount on your behalf, and I will pay you this back. So I've worked that out with my family. Right. Okay, so that would make sense then. So now that we've gotten past that, and we've said, okay, let's clear your debt. So we've kind of jumped a little ahead also, and we've attacked the topic of debt.
I don't think we jumped ahead. I think that's a good point to discuss that before you jump into deciding how much you want to
set aside. In my mind, it was ahead. In my mind, it was ahead. But as per what you're saying, it's actually these steps.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes you are able to manage debt while you do all three things at the same time. But yeah, if you want to, sometimes your aim should be just to get rid of it as soon as possible. And I think, I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but sometimes I think you have to come to a conclusion that this shouldn't be your future, in the sense that, sure, education loan sometimes is important. Housing loan is important, but you don't need to buy a phone on EMI. You don't need to buy a PS on EMI. You don't need to buy a car even on EMI. You don't even need to...
Let's talk about that. Again, like you said, I think this may tie back into our conversation about expenses. Sorry, on a very random note, is your nose not itching? I've touched my nose like 4 times now, and like you've not touched.
I have consciously decided not to.
Oh my God, I'm scratching my nose 4 times, and I was like,
at this point, my nose should be shining from all the sweat and the fatty acids on my nose. So sure, I'll take this chance to wipe it off.
You got facial hair, like doesn't the nose, at least doesn't your hair tickle your nose? Is what I'm wondering.
No man, I use the best facial beauty products. I got everything going perfectly for me.
Got it. Cow down, working for you. Good job.
Okay, so we've got our emergency fund and we've got our debt clearing. But I think before we get into tax planning, so that we set
No, we were going to talk about debt. We were going to talk about debt, what you had just...
Yes, but this is exactly. So to set a rule for debt is why we need to talk about not buying stuff on EMI, which is a really...
And I think it also ties back. This also ties back to our thing of establishing the baseline for what you define as a comfortable life. Because when you look at your data, you might see some really crazy expenses. Over your last 3 to 6 months, you'll be like, I didn't need to buy, a crazy expense, like Sid was saying, can be an iPhone. But I also know a crazy expense can be a ridiculous life insurance policy. Like I don't need a health insurance policy or a life insurance policy that's worth so much because it sounds nice, but the entire concept of insurance, for example, is predicated on the fact that you die, right? Life insurance, at least. Life insurance is predicated on the fact that you die. And your loved ones
and even more so because insurance is not an investment, so you should be not putting more than required into it.
Exactly. So think of insurance, and because we're talking about insurance, think of insurance like the name suggests, it's just insurance, just in case. But at the same time, remember, you are the money-making machine. You have the most potential to make the money. So take that money and put it in things that would grow your money, and you also continue to make more. Versus hoping an insurance plan that's predicated on your death takes care of your family. That just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, and I think people should just know that the reason why sometimes people end up paying that huge amount of insurance premium without knowing what the benefits are, that the honest truth is that people who sell insurance make a lot of money from commissions. I mean, it's one of the highest commission-making instruments out there, and so people will try to sell it to you, which is why it's more important for you to find out prior that this is the insurance I want, this is how little I can pay for more of a benefit. That is essentially how insurance should work. I mean, the insurance business works on the principle that most people are not going to cash out on what they're paying because it's based on an event in the future that's uncertain or probably not going to happen. In the case of life insurance, which is basically, or a term insurance, which is, and there is a difference there. I mean, sometimes, life insurance can become a lot too complicated, but I would just take this time to just push for a term insurance, which is basically just a pure risk cover, which means if something happens to you or me, we are protecting our families, whether you're leaving a wife behind or your kids behind. So you pay as little as possible on a yearly basis, but when you die, a huge chunk goes to them. And that's all people should be focusing on.
So because we're talking about insurance, when we say insurance, or maybe we should just come back to this, but there is a difference between life insurance.
We were talking about EMIs and we have come to the insurance thing. So let's probably go back to that.
I made a note here to talk about the difference between life insurance and term life insurance. Those are two different things. But yeah, so coming back to what you had said about debt, right? I think, and because that connects to the measure of what we establish as our benchmark for a comfortable life, like Sid was saying, you know what, iPhone on an EMI, not required. Unnecessary amounts paid on insurance, not required, which is that's how we got here. And, and so on and so forth. So you've got to be able to realistically establish a measure. And then when we're talking about debt, to Sid's point, live within that. Don't put yourself willingly in any sort of position of debt.
Exactly. I mean, the objective of removing debt from your life is not just to do it for the time being, it's also to ensure that you don't get back there in the future. And which is why I wanted to talk about this whole conversation of, I mean, it's such a common thing, right? I mean, most people, if you have to buy a phone, they always buy it on EMI. And, I would say there are exceptions to the rule where sometimes a necessity needs to be bought, and a phone can be necessary for a person whose livelihood depends on it. My bell just rang this 1 second. Do not make any comments on how big that package was.
I was not even going to comment. I mean, a package joke would just be a little too much for this podcast.
Right. Just coming back to the conversation about, it being a necessity sometimes to take an EMI. See, for example, I mentioned phone. It might be required for a livelihood. Sometimes even a car, because sometimes having a family of 4 or having a job that requires you to travel often might require a car. And I would say in those exceptions, it's okay. But for people who have been in the debt trap before and people who can now in the future afford to not get there, I would say that if you want a phone that costs a lot, if you want a car that costs obviously a big amount, have a sinking fund. And when I say a sinking fund, it doesn't sound as depressing as it is. It's just basically putting aside money until you actually reach the overall required goal. So if you want to spend 5 lakhs on a car, you take however long you need to reach 5 lakhs by setting aside money on a monthly basis or whenever you have it. And then when you reach the amount, you pay for the entire car in cash, or you pay for the entire phone in cash, or you pay for whatever gadget or requirement that you have, because it's much better paying off in cash. Because a lot of times, I mean, there are charges involved in paying on a monthly basis, which means you're at the end of it. Now, if you buy a car, which is a depreciating asset, which means that it loses value literally from the moment you buy it, and you take 5 years to pay it off, by the time you've paid it off, the car has no value at all. So why would you want to pay more?
Value at all, meaning you won't be, even if you sold the car, you would sell it off for much less. So you paid more for the car.
So you paid more for the car than you should have, and then you sold it for much lesser because it took you that long.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
but you can apply the principle to, I would say, anything that these days we focus on, basically an EMI thing, which is how most people sell it. I mean, if you go to Amazon or Flipkart, the first offer that you see is saying that, hey, 6 months option, 12 months option, this is how little you can pay, but you can still have the product that costs you 80 grand, So it's a mentality that people take a while to get out of. But
I want to highlight that the fact that you said it's a mentality that takes time to get out of. I know for a fact, for me, that took me time. To even just reach a place where, like, the simplest example is I was living in a bigger flat just 1 year ago. And we knew we had a fourth member of the family coming along, my daughter. And we made this decision to say, no, we're going to move into a smaller place. Now, why did we? Not because we absolutely had to, but I knew it was just a wise thing to do. It would give me a little more income to take that money and put it towards whatever it is I need to pay off, whether it was debt or whether I wanted to put it towards something that was more meaningful, which is future investment, whatever. But to Sid's point of a sinking fund, that is also something for which these choices that I've made, it contributes to. So, for example, what Sid calls a sinking fund in my world is what I call a QHA, which is quarterly, half-yearly, and annually fund. I call it a QHA fund. Right? And we have a QHA fund for once a year expenses that come around every 3 months, or expenses that come around every half year. And again, it's a very fluid fund that we have. So in a sense, we actually have a backup emergency fund, if that even makes sense. Right? We know once a year we're going to have to pay on our car insurance. We know once a year we're going to have to pay on and when we were living in the previous place, every 3 months, we would have had to pay a maintenance fee. So we would save up from our monthly amounts towards those fixed expenses, as well as those erratic expenses we knew would come, like maybe a medical bill that was going to be. So we had factored a base amount of, let's say we need to keep 50,000 aside for medical expenses in a year, unforeseen. And if we don't use it, that money happily goes off elsewhere. It'll go into an investment somewhere. It won't go into a holiday. It'll go into another investment somewhere. And then finally, after you've got all these funds in place, now come the thing we've been touching on so often, which is growing the money. We've cleared our debt. We've saved money up. Now, this was money we saved, put aside. Now, what do we do for the future? And again, this comes to your ability to think a little ahead. Now, some people think thinking ahead is a presumptuous activity because you never know where your life is going to be in 5 years. But let's be honest, if your kids came up to you one day and said, I need to go to college, that is not going to catch you off guard. You knew that was damn coming, right? Unless your kids are not bright, then it's a different story. But but if your kids do that, or if it's something, I'm going to retire. At the simplest, it's I know there is going to come a day where I have to stop. And when that day comes where I have to stop working, I still need to have money in my account. How do I prep for that? That is where this whole mystery term investments That's where this comes in. The word investments, portfolios, asset classes, cryptocurrency.
Yep.
We're here, baby. Let's go. Come on, Mr.
I wish
Stock
you hadn't mentioned
Portfolio.
cryptocurrency. But yeah, I mean, I think the next step, obviously, clearly, is somehow making your money work for you. I mean, but like in like since we already talked about it, it does in the Indian context start from your tax planning. Now, why I'm saying this is because tax planning has different ways you can do it. I mean, to be very specific about the details, there is a 1.5 lakh limit under the Section 80C of the Income Tax Act that allows you to set aside. I know half people have fallen asleep by now, but essentially you have the option to save 1.5 lakhs away from your tax liability. And let me be clear that 1.5 lakhs, if you invest into, that is exactly the amount that will be deducted from your overall income, which means you're paying tax on a lower amount, which is reduced by 1.5 lakhs. This 1.5 lakh thing only applies if you earn more than 5 lakhs a year in India, because up to 5 lakhs a year, you're basically not paying any tax, and it's your tax liability is pretty much zero. We can take an example that will help clarify this point further. If you make 6.5 lakhs a year, and your government is giving you the 1.5 lakh option where you can put that money aside, then your income becomes 5 lakh. Because 6.5 lakh is what you earn, you've set aside 1.5 lakh under this ATC section to invest, so your income become 5 lakhs, which means your tax liability again comes back to zero, because up to 5 lakhs is basically no tax. So in essence, if people take advantage of this option, you can be earning 6.5 lakhs a year and pay no tax at all. Now, anything beyond that, you're only reducing your tax liability, but up to 6.5, you're paying no tax.
You're paying no tax. Got it. Okay. So hence, and of course, you pay no tax because you're paying that 1.5, you're putting that 1.5 lakhs somewhere. Now that part is the investing part.
Yes. And actually, there are so many ways you can avail that 1.5 lakh limit. I'll give you a few examples. I mean, apart from the investments that are ELSs, which is equity linked savings scheme, it's a type of an equity mutual fund. Then there is PPF, which is public provident fund. There is PF, which is provident fund, which your employer can contribute to and also match with your own from your salary. There is term insurance, which is your risk cover, which I was talking about earlier. With the premium that you pay can also come under this 1.5 lakh. Your tuition fees, which is part of your overall school fees for your child, can also come under this. Then there's something called ULIP, which is unit linked insurance policy, which is sort of an investment linked insurance thing, which also comes under this. So there are a lot of options.
So all these different instruments you're talking about are different buckets and options by which we can invest. But all these added together should make 1.5. It's not like I'm putting 1.5 in each, right?
But yes, correct. If you want, you could basically combine all of them and add up to 1.5. But I would recommend that you basically out of all of these different things that I talked about, if your company is already doing PF, you obviously have no choice. So that's a given. But apart from the PF thing, do only ELSs and do only term insurance. And we can jump into the why, because that's obviously very important. So to just give you a background, I mean, obviously, like I talked about, if you're investing in these tax saving, now let's just keep that as tax saving instead of saying Section 80C, because it sounds much better. So instead of all of these tax saving options that you have, ELSs, which is the equity mutual fund, has the lowest amount of lock-in, which means it is the shortest amount of period where you don't have access to that money. For example, PPF, there's a lock-in or no access for 15 years. For ULIP, it's 5 years. And for ELS, it's only 3 years.
So what we're saying is now that you are ready to invest money, the basics of investing in India begin with tax saving, which is also a form of investing, and investing, which is also a form of tax saving here under this particular thing that Sid is referring to, called Section 80C of our Indian income tax laws. Now, in that, there are these different options you can do. Now, I'm sure we've all seen mutual fund ads on TV. We've heard of mutual funds. Again, we won't jump into all these different instruments for the sake of time, because this has already been a very long conversation. But I think to Sid's point, mutual funds, this is a a mutual fund is where you can put in small amounts of money, and a fund house will manage that money for you. They will invest that money on your behalf. So you can put in 500 rupees, you can put in 1,000 rupees, really affordable amounts, and they will manage that money on your behalf. And voila, you will also have a portfolio. If you've been always wanted to use that word and say, I'm an investor. Of course, this doesn't make you a legit investor. It makes you a passive investor, but still you get to call yourself an investor. So that's what he's talking about. So now within mutual funds, there is a specific category of funds called that are linked to this ELSS scheme, which is the...
let's just dial back a little bit before we explain the ELSS thing, because a mutual fund, I mean, I think your definition is great, but to simplify, I would say that it is a simpler way to invest just because someone else is managing the money for you, and that takes away time from your side, that gives you more time basically to not worry about these things.
If you are somebody who thinks you need to know about stock markets, you need to know about share prices, you need to know which company is doing well, blah, blah. This stuff just cuts past all that, because let me tell you also, very realistically, it sounds cool to say that you were looking into all this stuff, but it's a science by itself. It is a science by itself.
And the thing is, I mean...
most of us don't have time for that science.
Exactly. And the mutual fund, the way it works is it's a pool. Basically, there's a huge pool being managed by the fund house and the fund manager. And basically, you can put in as much as you want, and whatever you put in is your share of the whole pool. So you're allotted a certain portion of it, and that's how much will basically grow based on how much you put in. Now, within the whole mutual fund thing, there is an equity one, which means that the fund manager is putting your money indirectly into stocks, which is they are managing the stocks, you're putting the money in the pool. There is also debt mutual funds, where basically the fund managers in buying bonds on your behalf, but basically nothing is in your name, you still own only a part of the pool. So the bonds bit is the safer side, where basically, it's just to give you a simplest definition of bond is when a company is borrowing money from someone, and that someone is you, and in this case it is the fund manager. So because the fund manager is lending money to this corporation, they obviously have to pay him a certain amount of interest, which is obviously, in a sense, if you give 1 crore to a company, basically, depending on how long they're taking to pay you back, they have to pay you a certain amount of interest. And that is what the fund manager is trying to take advantage of in a debt fund. Whereas in the equity fund, which is obviously more risky, the fund manager is buying stocks depending on what kind of a fund you've put in. And basically, they're managing that risk themselves, whereas you just have to worry about putting your money there.
Got it. Okay. So you're saying under mutual funds, there are different types of mutual funds. There's equity mutual funds, there's debt mutual funds.
There is also a hybrid which combines both, but I don't want to get into the details of it. But I did feel like that's important to mention before we get into ELSS, because ELSS, while it is a tax-saving option, is a
highly equity.
Yes, it's an equity fund. So which means it's a risk-based product, which means in that 3 years, so where you obviously have no access to it, you could see the value of that money go negative temporarily. And so before we people subscribe to this idea of it, I think people should know the risk inherent in it. And since it is equity, you are investing in a risky product, which means if you're putting 100 rupees there today, in the near future, which is a year or maybe year and a half, that 100 can become maybe 95, maybe 90, maybe 80, maybe in 85. But the advantage in this kind of a risky product is that since it's already a tax saving option, it's a 3-year lock-in. So even if you panic and you want to take out the money when it goes into negative, you can't. And that gives you a good experience of how the equity market works, because essentially people should not be acting on emotions because the market has fallen or things are looking negative in the short term. The people should have a big picture. Yes, we are doing tax saving for the year, but it is with the goal of investing for your future, for the long term. I'm saying 5 years and beyond. Yes, the tax saving option here is the simplest because it has the lowest amount of lock-in, which is you cannot touch this money for 3 years in an ELSS. But even if you invest it for the 3-year lock-in, keep it there as long as possible, because it will grow and the magic of compound returns will bear fruit there.
Interesting. So you touched on the magic of compound returns. So when you say the magic of compound returns, and when we say the money grows in these particular funds, does that, in its simplest sense, do you mean that money does not grow linearly, but money grows exponentially?
Yes.
Okay. So it's
I
not
mean,
like,
it's in essence.
yeah.
I mean, just to give you a brief example, I think you can best illustrate this by giving anyone an example. So if you're saying that, hey, let's invest in an equity fund and you're getting 15% per annum. Now, 15% per annum, you have to understand, doesn't mean that if you put today, 100 becomes 115, the next year, the 115 grows another 15%, and that amount goes to another 15%. You're right about the linear bit. I mean, in equity, nothing is linear. You could have a year of negative returns, a second year of muted or single digit returns, and third year of huge returns. But when you say 15% per annum, it means it averages out to that bit if you hold on for at least 4 to 5 years. I would say if you're investing in something like risk in equity, do not plan to take just that money for at least 4 to 5 years. And when you have that mindset, that's when you're basically ready to invest in that, because you will see it go up like crazy, you will see it go down like crazy. But the point is that now how compound return works is, and coming back to your question, is that in a fixed deposit, which is what most people are used to, if you're getting 8% basically, let's do high actually, let's say 6%, basically you're getting 6% on 100 rupees, so that becomes 106 at the first year, and that basically on the 106 you get another 6%, and the 106 basically maybe goes to 113, and the 113 gets another 6%. Now why this matters is that you're not basically getting only 6% on what you invested. Basically, if you are putting in 100 rupees, every rupee there on works for you, which means your 100 becomes 106. The 106 now works to basically get 6% on that. So that when increases, and obviously 6 have taken a short amount of return, because fixed deposit is what most people are used to, and the compound return still works there. Now, coming back into equity and how compound return really benefits is when you hold on for longer periods. You will not see the benefit of compound returns in the short term at all. But just to give you an example and to make this point even better and how scintillating it can be, let's take an example of where you put 15,000 rupees per month. And if you put that 15,000 rupees per month in any fund, let's just say you put in an equity fund for 15 years, which means you're investing 15,000 every month for 15 years. That amounts to 27 lakhs. Okay, you put 15,000, basically it's, and 15 years, the invested value, which means what you put aside is 27 lakhs. If that 15,000 per month grows to 15% per annum, at the end of 15 years, you have a crore with you. So let's get that straight again. You put 27 lakhs by putting 15,000 per month for 15 years, but because you earn 15% on that on an annual basis in the long term, which is 15 years, at the end of 15 years, you have a crore. So your 27 lakhs has grown almost 4 times to what you've actually put. And that is basically the power of compound returns.
And that,
you do not see it in the short term.
And that is why we say invest, people. And I think you've just touched on the very essence of what we talk about when we're talking about building wealth. Again, wealth, when we talk about wealth, we're not defining it in its traditional measure of millions and millions. We're just talking about wealth, meaning you live comfortably, you're able to help others, and you're able to do whatever is your eventual picture. And to be able to do that, your money needs to grow. And to be able to grow your money, you have different options. And when you start in your investing journey, the tax saving is a critical component of it, because you start to earn more in the short term, which is you start to get more of your income per month. At the same time, putting away money like this, you may be putting away 10,000, 15,000, but you get to put money away through these different instruments. Now, in this case, we're talking about ELSS, which is equity linked savings schemes, which are basically in a lot of equity mutual funds. There are also what Sid was talking about, which is debt mutual funds. We don't have to get into that. But those things also are good, but it's just that they're not as risky.
Yes, but I think...
And the returns are not as...
Right. But I think there is a balance, obviously, in everything. And once you get past this tax saving option, once you've done your 1.5, and if you have the bandwidth for more, you'll obviously start considering options for regular investing, which can be equity, which can be debt, it can be a combination of both. Now, the usual formula is, which most people to think about is, I mean, if you're 30 years old and obviously most people retire at 60, which means you're under 30 years for retirement. What most people think about it, and the way they look at it, the balance between both equity, risk, and safe, is that if you're 30 years old, you deduct that from 100. And you have 70. 70 is what you should be putting in risk. Remaining 30 you put in safe. And that equation will change as you grow closer to your retirement, because
so you're saying the younger you are, the more risk you can take.
It's important to note that because equity, once you get a taste of it, can be really great, but it's not the only option available out there. And as much as money can make for you, you do need a combination of safe investments also, because it's all about having a cushion in your investment bucket. I mean, no matter how much money you're setting aside, as you grow older, you're going to grow to a stage, like you said, I mean, you're at 60. So once you're 60, you're not going to earn income, which means you need something to pay you, which is obviously something that you set aside for yourself that has been accumulating for that 30-year period if you're 30 years old. Now, obviously, as you grow closer to retirement, you start focusing on increasing that safe bucket and reducing the risky bucket. Now, obviously, like you said, I mean, the returns are lower in safe bucket, and obviously, people should look at all of those things. Now, another thing that I want to mention, that because I mentioned a fixed deposit, is, and I want to just make this distinction between a fixed deposit, because so many people rely on it, is that fixed deposit is basically whatever interest you earn. Whether you're holding a 1-year fixed deposit, 2-year fixed deposit, 3 or 5, you are earning a certain amount of interest every year. You will be taxed on that interest as per your tax slab. So
basically, money that is sitting aside and that is supposed to be there for you, even when you retire, whether you're making money or not, you're still paying some tax.
Because, for example, right now, most fixed deposits would give you on an average 6%. Now, if you belong to the highest tax bracket, which is 30% in India, you're losing 1/3 of the 6% to basically tax, which essentially makes your post-tax returns lower than inflation. Now, why is that important? Because inflation means the cost of everything is going up. So the average rate of inflation is around 4 to 5% at this point in India, which means that is at least the amount of returns you need to make from any kind of product to say that you've not lost value. And if the concept of inflation, if you know, is basically that the cost of everything is increasing, which means the value of things are also reducing. Your 100 is not worth 100 next year because the value of everything is going down, the cost of everything is going up, which means if the rate of inflation is about 4 or 5, your 100 could be worth 96 or 95, which means if you've not gotten that kind of returns in your portfolio or whatever bucket that you have, you're lost money.
Let me put it in terms again, that for someone who's listening, what Sid is saying is, because I know he just shot a lot of numbers in percentages and you're like, I wasn't paying attention to the math, but okay, he's the expert. It's basically like Sid started out by saying his dad earned 750 rupees a month. Now imagine, and that was back in the day. Now imagine earning 750 rupees a month today. You're going nowhere. You actually, you're not living. And so that's what Sid is saying. Back in the day, 750 rupees had so much value. Today, that same 750 rupees is nothing. So that's what he means. The price of things keeps going up, but the value of money keeps coming down. So which is why when your parents or when someone well-meaning says, save the money, that's good advice for the short term. If it's 1 year, whatever. But if you're thinking 50 years of your life, you can't just say, I saved. It was, I put that money somewhere where it just grows by itself. So that in many years from now, when I get that 1 crore is actually probably only going to be worth today's equivalent of 80 lakhs.
Yeah, and I think, and the alternative obviously is the question now, because if you can't invest into fixed deposits, what do you look at? Go for debt mutual funds. That's what I was talking about. Debt mutual funds have safe options where, depending on how much time you need to set it aside for, there are different options. Fixed deposit is the same thing. You can put it for 1 year, you can put it for 3 years, you can put it for 5 years. There are similar products in debt mutual funds where you can put aside the same thing. And the advantage is that in fixed deposit, you get tax on the interest every year. In mutual funds, you only get tax when you pull out the money, which means your post-tax returns on mutual funds, even in debt, compared to fixed deposits, will always be higher.
Higher, right. So here's a question now. We've only spoken about one type of investment, few subcategories, but in general, we've spoken about one type of investment instrument, which is mutual funds, right? You had also spoken about term life insurance, and we said between equity linked saving schemes and term life insurance, that's pretty much the 1.5 lakhs at base minimum that we can invest. Let's touch on insurance very quickly.
Right.
And then I think to wrap up, we should touch on the obvious other stuff, which is our new, what we call the play categories of investing, cryptocurrency and stuff like that, where we put money that we're willing to lose in things like that, right? Entirely. So let's touch on insurance first. There's differences between your regular life insurance and your term life insurance. You and I both have taken term life insurance policies. You want to explain why?
The principle you go in when you invest, when you put in money in insurance, is that you're putting that aside at the assumption that something is basically going to go wrong. I mean, it's the same case with the car insurance, it's the same case with the bike insurance, it's the same case with life insurance. Insurance is basically something going wrong, and you're covering that risk with an amount. Now, in the case of life insurance and term insurance that we're talking about, term insurance is basically a type of life insurance, but it's only a pure risk cover. Now, why I say this is that, like I mentioned earlier, if something happens to me, and usually you pay the premium until retirement or the age where you're earning money, because that's when you need to be focused on. Because if something happens to you while you're the breadwinner of the house, the rest of the family needs to be covered. So if I have if I have a family of four, where there's a wife and two kids, and if something happens to me early on and I pass away, way ahead of time, you want to you want to put money in a term insurance, which will make sure that a huge lump sum is paid out to them at that event, which is my death. And obviously the hope is that none of that happens, but it doesn't mean you can't be prepared for it, which is why a lot of people have asked me, sure, I'm putting for example, I pay 15,000 rupees a year for a cover of about 2 crores, which means I will continue to pay that 15,000 every year until I'm 60. And if something happens to me, 2 crores is paid out to my wife. Now, obviously in the future, there'll be kids, so then it's paid out to the family. Now, a lot of people ask me, does that 15,000 come back to you accumulatively at
I just want to point out that he put his life plan there. He said, obviously there will be kids. Just obviously, because I hope Sid's mother is hearing this. Obviously there will be kids. Don't worry, your grandbabies are coming. All right, go on, man.
Right. Right. So, 15,000, obviously putting aside on a yearly basis for 30 years is a lot of money. And people say, will I get that back? The answer is no. You will get a huge lump sum basically if you die. And obviously, as dark as that is, but you're preparing for the worst, and that's all the term insurance is about. You're covering the risk of you passing away and your family not being able to manage life. And obviously 2 crores is a good start. You can adjust those amounts. You can have a higher one, you can have a lower one, but your premium that you pay annually gets affected by how much you want to be paid out.
Correct. And you set the term, which is I will pay till I'm 55, I'm paid till I'm 60, whatever. And the other advantage of a term life insurance is the fact that you pay that same 15,000, in Sid's case, 15,000, year in, year out. That amount doesn't change. So notice that Sid may continue to grow in his income potential. He will still continue to pay just 15,000. And that is a huge advantage when it comes to term life insurance. But what about regular life insurance? Regular life insurance is typically sold as, hey, it's an insurance policy, but you get some kind of return from it.
Exactly. And the way that life insurance, the regular life insurance is sold is that they promise you some kind of a payout. They try to basically wrap it up as an investment, which it is not. Insurance is never an investment, and there are way better options out there. People don't really understand what they're getting into. So when you get into a regular life, they can promise you payouts after a certain amount of time of paying premium. They can promise some lump sum when you turn a certain age, but it shouldn't be considered as an investment, because if you're anyways thinking about a 30-year period if you're 30 years old, or a 20-year period if you're 40 years old, or even a 10-year period if you're 50 years old, that's a good amount of time to put aside your money in a better place and get better returns, which is more guaranteed than an insurance, because I have never in my experience seen an insurance product that's given you good long-term returns, because the whole point is that if you have time to keep aside money for a longer term, you can afford to take more risk.
So the principle here that Sid's trying to highlight is simply, if it's about returns, if it's about getting money back, don't put your money in insurance. Put your money somewhere where the money will grow. And we will touch on a few more other things. We only touched about mutual funds, but put your money somewhere where it will grow, versus putting it in something.
The only thing you need to compare it to is, the only thing you need to compare to is like a car insurance. I mean, you're paying an amount every year, right? Are you expecting that back in any form? No, you're not. You're going to pay it as long as you have the car. But if something happens and you have an accident or something goes wrong, at least you know that you don't have to pay out from your pocket. And that's the best comparison.
That's the best example. I agree. That's the best example. Like, this BMW here needs insurance, right? But he knows he ain't going to look all that when he's like 60 or 70, Okay, anyway, never mind. Maybe not the analogy we need. Yours is better. We'll stick with yours. So we've touched on that. You beautifully outlined insurance, term life insurance. I feel like we could have been so succinct about a lot of things we spoke about earlier. We're going to chop this episode down to I don't know. Right now we're running 2 hours.
This might become like a 10-part series.
No, but
we will be playing over the next year or so.
Unfortunately,
please tune in.
I mean, I wish I was Joe Rogan. I could just upload the whole damn thing and keep it at 2.5 hours and stuff. But hey, you know what? It's okay. We'll figure that out. The final thing, I mean, we've touched on the very basics, and that's been the intent of this conversation. Touch on just the principles. So even if you're listening in from another country, and I know right now we got into the specifics of how we could invest when you're sitting in India, but please keep the principles in mind, because the principles are universal. Especially even for life insurance and term life insurance, it's the same principles. Now, finally, I want to touch on, we've got our bases covered. We've put our money, like Sid was saying, there is a risk depending on your age. So we're assuming right now you're 30 something listening to this, or in your 20s, or even in your 40s. Let's go there, right? So you can take a significant amount of risk. So you put your money in something that's a little more risky, but 30% of your money is also in some stuff that is considered safe, right? Now let's move there. You've done all this good stuff. You put your money in the right places. Now comes this new thing where you can make crap loads of money. Cryptocurrency. Let's talk about that. That was a topic that was definitely coming. So you've got a good portfolio, and crypto comes along. So I think, Sid, that the obvious question here is, what the hell is cryptocurrency?
I mean, at this point, it's just, cryptocurrency is basically, if everyone knows, it's based on the whole blockchain concept. So essentially, people are just trying.
Which is a technology.
Yeah, which is a technology, which is a ledger-based system to keep track of things, as opposed to what's happening these days with middlemen. And obviously, this doesn't require that. And it's just a simplified way of dealing with things in the future. But what's come out of it is different forms of currency, basically coming out of the fact that people think that dollar is losing its value, and fiat money, which is your rupee, your dollars, your euros, which is going to lose value over a period of time. Now, with cryptocurrency, it's now been finally classified as an asset class, which I talked about earlier, which is basically it's a different bucket altogether where you can make more money. The whole reason why the whole cryptocurrency has shot up in the last 1 year, especially, is because the US has printed more money in the last 1 year than its entire history. So when you have that kind of supply, the value of that money is also going down, because inflation goes up eventually when you print that much money. And basically, if inflation is going up, the value of your money is coming down. And that is the basic reason why people are pushing from fiat currency, which is dollars, euros, and rupees, which is the normal currency, to cryptocurrency. Because basically they're under the assumption that, hey, at least that cryptocurrency is not losing value like the dollar is. That is why the shift has happened. And obviously, people have been putting money in crypto for different reasons. And I would say that at this point, a lot of people who initially didn't believe in it have adopted it just because it seems to be making money for people.
The trend currently.
It looks like it is going in the direction where it will have more value, because the prediction models all say that this is going to, jump 4x, 5x in the next basically year, 2 and longer. So ideally at this point, just coming back to why we're talking about crypto is that yes, people are becoming rich, but at the same time, a lot of people are losing money. No one talks about that because that's not news. I mean, people are talking about people making money, but no one ever talks about people losing lots of money. People put their life savings in crypto and have lost a good chunk of it because they didn't understand where it comes from. Because there are different type of crypto investors. There are people who believe in the whole blockchain thing and cryptocurrency having more value in the future, and they'll hold until kingdom comes. And there are people who basically just want to buy today so that they can sell in the future and make money out of it. And sometimes people buy when it is up and then sell it when it's down, and they go out at a loss with a bad experience. Which is why, like you said, it is at this point, you should only be putting money in crypto that is play money, which means that if you put certain amount in crypto today, be ready to lose the whole thing. And that's exactly why I have less than 1% of my entire investments in crypto. I don't know how it's going to be in the future. To be honest, it could lose its value completely, but at the same time, it could grow into a certain amount, and that will just be sheer luck.
Now, I just want to point out that when a hedge fund manager says he's put 1% of his money in crypto, that's a considerable amount of money. But I think for the rest of us normal folk, I think that the principle still applies, which is until you've understood what you want from your financial scene, from your life, your decisions will be influenced by trends. And if something like cryptocurrency, which we've tried to explain over the last 10, 15 minutes, and you might be more confused, or you might not have had an answer to your question. I think if there's anything you can take away from our conversation around this, it's this. If you're someone who's got your bases covered and you are clear, and when I say bases, this is inclusive of your picture for your life, then okay, go ahead, consider crypto. But otherwise, you would just be influenced by another trend of where you can potentially make some money. And that is not a good way to fly when it comes to your financial plan. So the point here being, we're not against crypto, as you can clearly see. One of us is at least investing in it. One of us has an app downloaded where he's yet to put money in crypto, but I haven't done enough research. I'll be honest. I don't know enough about it.
I do want to add that at this point, yes, I did say that I have 1% of it, but that doesn't mean everyone should have 1%. And like you said, there's a reason we're talking about this at the end of the whole thing, because there's a certain journey to it. And crypto is even riskier than putting money in a stock market. So unless you have been through a certain amount of time in risky environments where your money has seen fluctuations and you have not panicked and you've stayed calm during that time, do not even venture into crypto, because the kind of fluctuations or the volatility that we see in crypto you will not see anywhere else, because it can fall 50%, which means 100 rupees that you put there can become 50 in a span of a week. If someone decides
versus an equity mutual fund. Again, we're just talking mutual funds, but we could be talking about any tool. But versus something else that's as risky as an equity mutual fund, which last year fell. A lot of the mutual funds just dipped in their value because stock prices dipped in value. But again, it did not dip as far as 50%. It went down by...
to be honest, it fell by 40% last March, but there was a good reason to it. The market doesn't just fall for no reason. There was
it bounces back.
Pandemic hit the entire universe, which has not happened in the last 100 years. So that is a huge impact and ramifications for jobs and sectors, industries, countries all together, which is why the market fell. So as you can see, the stock market has underlying value in different places and different assets and different macro and microeconomic factors, which is like within country and overall global factors. Whereas the crypto is, yes, it's a global phenomenon right now, but it doesn't derive value from those kind of things that you see in like established asset classes like equity right now.
So I think we have covered the entire gamut of Finance 101, imagine personal finance 101 at least. I wish somebody had done this with me when I was freaking 12, man. I'd be a millionaire right now. But this was good, Sid. I think I want to close on this note. We we went a little ad hoc here and there, but the essence is simple. There is a principle and there is a philosophy around money that each person needs to develop. I will reiterate this one line again and again and again. This is the start. But to develop this requires you to know exactly what you want from at least your financial aspirations, which will typically be linked to your definitions of success and all of those things as well. But if you're able to define that for yourself, then you've got something to work with. In terms of, okay, now let's start looking at how I spend my money. Let me look at if there are ways by which I can probably curb the spending, maybe increase the spending, because I recognize I'm a miser and I don't enjoy myself as much. That's exactly what my wife brought to the table. I mean, she can spend money. I'm kidding. Not like she blows the money. She's also very careful, but she's taught me how to let loose a bit, right? And so there are different ways to go about it, but the whole point is, having a plan, you can never go wrong. And I think if there's anything I can encourage who this podcast is targeted at, which is typically 20 to 30 year olds, it's never too late. You may be even 39, 40 years old, or you may be 50 years old, like Sid was saying. You still have time. So now that you have this information, what will you do with it is the question. So if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. You know where to find me. You can find me at abelmathewsentertainment on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well at abelmathewsentm. Unfortunately, entertainment was taken. And you can find me on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. So wherever it is, social media, feel free to hit me up with a message. Sid, if someone wants to reach you, first of all, are they allowed to? Are you?
I'm unavailable for the next few years, so I don't have a social media presence like Abel does. But I did want to add something before we wrap up, and I want to say that I think Abel's made such great points. But I think with the day and age that we live in, with the amount of resource and information available out there, everyone has access to this kind of stuff. So if you heard me and Abel talk about stuff that you had no clue about, look it up. I mean, there's so much to read about, and I think you could gain a lot from it, and it will also change your perspective about money and what you see as success or comfort in your future. And then just want to thank Abel for having me. It's a lovely discussion.
This discussion. It was so intense. I'm just like, my gosh, I've got a lot of editing to do after this whole thing is done. Thanks, Sid. I mean, thanks for the time. Thanks for the clarity. Thanks for the conversation. We might have to do this again on Clubhouse. I would love to do this, or maybe if anyone who's listening to the podcast requests that we do something specific, feel free to let us know. I'd love to do it. I'm not the financial expert. Like Sid says, Sid's a couple of years ahead, but he's also still learning. So whatever we learn, we just put it out there. I think it'll be a fun, interactive discussion if you happen to have it on Clubhouse. So you can ask all your follow-up questions there. That's actually the way to reach me. Clubhouse. Actually, let's do that. Let's actually do that. It's a good idea. Let's do an interactive thing on Clubhouse. Where we just, or even on one of the the Instagram lives also, where people can just drop questions and we just answer them. Whatever we've said today is not from a place of theory. We actually have done these things. Thank you for listening. You know where to hit us up now. With that said, I'm gonna let Sid go to his lunch, and I'm gonna eat mine as well. Enjoy your piece of the pie, baby. With that crypto investment of yours, enjoy your piece of the pie. I'll try my best. Peace.